Imagine waking up one morning and realizing that the world around you has become unrecognizable. Not because of some grand catastrophe, but because the people you once knew, the neighbors, friends, even colleagues you trusted, no longer question anything. The air itself feels heavier, buzzing with endless noise, overflowing with opinions, facts, and half-truths. Yet beneath it all, something is missing. The spark of curiosity. The pause before agreement. The brave question that dares to disturb the comfortable. What has vanished is not intelligence, but something far more essential. The art of critical thinking. Think about what it means when people stop questioning. When the ability to reason, to challenge, to reflect, fades away. What remains is not clarity but confusion, not wisdom but shallow certainty. What rises in its place is a culture of instant reactions, quick judgments, and echo chambers that reward conformity. What philosophers today are beginning to call collective stupidity is not stupidity in the sense of low intelligence. It is something more dangerous, the mass surrender of independent thought, the blind acceptance of whatever narrative is repeated the loudest. This is the world we are drifting toward. And if we fail to see it clearly, we risk losing not only our freedom of mind but our freedom of life itself. But if we confront it, if we dare to pull back the veil, we can begin the process of reclaiming something extraordinary. The power to think. The uncomfortable truth is that thinking is hard. Always has been. And in today's world, it is actively discouraged. Look around. What does society reward? Not contemplation, not patience, not the careful weighing of truth. Instead, it rewards speed, reaction, outrage, and obedience. Platforms are built to push you toward what feels comfortable, familiar, or sensational, not what is real. Schools drill facts into memory rather than teaching how to ask questions. And the result is not an accident. It is design. Decades ago, the thinker Noam Chomsky warned that media and institutions operate by what he called the manufacturing of consent. In simple terms, it means people are not taught to think, but to agree. Not to investigate, but to absorb. And when this pattern becomes normal, when questioning itself is seen as suspicious, society becomes far easier to control. People believe they are thinking, but what they are really doing is reacting to the signals handed to them. Critical thinking, once celebrated as a cornerstone of human progress, has become inconvenient. It gets in the way of online debates, slows down arguments, threatens ideologies, and dares to ask the question so many fear. Is this really true? In an age where certainty is prized above all, even a simple doubt can seem dangerous. So how did we arrive here? The answer begins with the sheer flood of information we face daily. Neuroscientists like Daniel Levitin have shown that the modern human processes nearly 5 times more information each day than people did only a few decades ago. Every moment is saturated with pings, notifications, news, ads, and voices competing for our attention. Our brains, once evolved for a far simpler rhythm of life, are overwhelmed. And when overwhelmed, the brain cuts corners. Instead of evaluating ideas deeply, it falls back on habits and shortcuts. It looks for social cues, for what appears popular, for the voices of perceived authority. This is called social proof. It's a survival mechanism that once helped humans navigate danger in groups. But now it has been hijacked. How often have you seen a post with thousands of likes and assumed it must be true or important? That assumption is not the voice of reason. It is the shortcut of the mind. And it is why collective stupidity spreads so easily. Not because people are unintelligent, but because they are conditioned to follow signals instead of seeking truth. Another piece of this decline lies in how our brains are being rewired. The neuroscientist Marianne Wolf has shown how digital culture reshapes the way we read and process information. Once, reading meant sustained attention, immersion, and reflection. Now, most of us skim. We jump between tabs, click through headlines, and struggle to focus for long stretches. But here's the paradox. True critical thinking requires attention. You cannot analyze if your focus breaks every few seconds. You cannot reflect if you're constantly reacting. The deep habits of reading and reflection that once nurtured thought are slipping away. Ask yourself, when was the last time you finished an article without reaching for your phone? When was the last time you paused after hearing something provocative, not to react, but simply to think? These are small habits, but they accumulate. And as they vanish, so too does our capacity to think with depth. The late Carl Sagan once warned that we live in a society utterly dependent on science and technology, yet one in which hardly anyone truly understands them. His warning was not simply about ignorance. It was about the erosion of our ability to critically examine the very systems we depend upon. And today, we see the consequence of his warning. We live in a world of hot takes, instant opinions, ideological wars, and tribal shouting matches. The rarest rebellion now is not to scream louder, but to think clearly. But let's be honest, critical thinking is not just difficult. It is uncomfortable. It forces us to confront the possibility that we are wrong. It pushes us into cognitive dissonance, the tension between what we believe and what new evidence shows us. And in a culture where identity and certainty are prized above all else, that discomfort feels threatening. So instead of engaging, we retreat. We cling to our tribe, repeat the slogans, and hide behind the safety of agreement. This is how curiosity gives way to conformity. Instead of questioning, we defend. Instead of exploring, we cancel. Instead of dialogue, we memorize and recite. The great philosophical traditions of the past, from Socrates' dialogues to the debates of the Enlightenment, are being replaced by a culture of performance, where slogans stand in for thought. And what happens when questioning dies? The consequences are devastating. Without questioning, there is no protection against manipulation. Without reflection, there is no shield against fear. Without critical thought, the mind becomes an open door through which propaganda, distraction, and control walk freely. And so we must ask, who benefits from a population that does not think for itself? To answer that, we must examine the systems that have shaped us. Let's begin with education. John Taylor Gatto, a teacher who won awards but also became one of schooling's sharpest critics, argued that modern education was never designed to create independent thinkers. It was designed during the industrial age to produce workers, predictable, obedient, efficient, but never disruptive. As Gatto put it, schools teach little except how to obey. Think back to your own schooling. Were you rewarded for curiosity, or for memorizing the right answer? Did you learn to question authority, or to follow the rules and avoid mistakes? From an early age, the message is clear. Stay inside the lines, repeat what you're told, and don't ask too many questions. And as children grow into adults, this lesson doesn't disappear. It transforms. In workplaces, in social circles, in politics, we learn that questioning the consensus is dangerous. Speaking an unpopular thought can risk isolation, ridicule, even punishment. The psychologist Eric Fromm once wrote about this tendency in his book Escape from Freedom. He argued that many people secretly desire to surrender their freedom of thought. Why? Because true freedom comes with responsibility. If you think for yourself, you can no longer hide behind ignorance. You can no longer blame the crowd. You must face the uncertainty of truth. And that, for many, is terrifying. So instead, we choose comfort. We choose distraction. We choose the crowd. Social media has amplified this choice beyond anything our ancestors could imagine. What was once a tool for global connection is now an arena of constant outrage and emotional manipulation. The platforms are designed not for truth, but for engagement. They reward whatever keeps us scrolling: outrage, division, certainty. They do not ask you to think, only to react. And in that constant storm of reactions, the voice of reflection is drowned out. The philosopher Marshall McLuhan saw this coming decades ago. He said, "The medium is the message. The way information is delivered shapes how we think." And today's mediums shape us for speed, outrage, and shallow certainty. In such an environment, truth itself becomes secondary. What matters is not what is true, but what goes viral. And here lies one of the gravest dangers of all, the tyranny not of political majority, but of cognitive majority. When people stop asking what is true and start asking only how many people agree, truth itself begins to decay. So where do we go from here? The answer lies not in shouting louder, but in asking better questions. Questions that cut through slogans and force us to think. Who benefits when I believe this? What assumptions lie beneath this certainty? How do I know what I know? And perhaps most importantly, how often do I seek out perspectives I disagree with? Not to attack, but to understand. These are not easy questions. But they are necessary. Because the antidote to collective stupidity is not simply intelligence. It is courage. Courage to admit we might be wrong. Courage to pause instead of react. Courage to step outside the comfort of agreement. Socrates once said that true wisdom lies in knowing that you know nothing. That was not an act of humility for its own sake. It was a reminder to remain curious, to remain open, to remain willing to think. And yet today, humility is rare. Certainty is celebrated. Arrogance is mistaken for wisdom. Everyone has an opinion. Few have understanding. Everyone wants to speak. Few want to listen. And in such a world, true thinkers often go unheard. Their process is too slow for a culture of speed. Their silence too deep for a culture of noise. But that does not mean their thinking is unimportant. In fact, it is more vital than ever. Because once you surrender your ability to think, you surrender your freedom. You become a puppet, your strings pulled by forces unseen. And those forces are not mysterious. They are economic powers profiting from your distraction. Political systems thriving on your outrage. Institutions dependent on your obedience. But when you reclaim your mind, something extraordinary happens. The illusions fall away. You begin to see. You stop consuming ideas passively and start seeking truth actively. And in doing so, you light a fire. The same fire that has burned through the ages in the hearts of philosophers, revolutionaries, and seekers of truth. So the question is not whether society is becoming less thoughtful. It is whether you will let yourself become part of that tide. Will you join the slumber, or will you wake up? Stay with me, because what comes next will take us deeper into the very mechanics of the mind. You'll see how even the brightest among us fall prey to manipulation, not because they lack intelligence, but because the brain itself is wired for shortcuts that can be exploited. The battlefield is not out there in the media or the schools alone. It is inside your own mind. And if we are to resist collective stupidity, we must first learn how to navigate the traps hidden within our own thinking. Despite what we like to believe, the human mind is not the purely rational machine we imagine. We want to think of ourselves as logical creatures, weighing facts and making reasoned choices. But the truth, revealed by decades of psychology, is far more sobering. The mind is emotional first, rational second. And that order, emotion before logic, is exactly what leaves us vulnerable. Nobel Prize-winning psychologist Daniel Kahneman spent years studying the way we think. His groundbreaking book Thinking, Fast and Slow revealed that our brains operate with two systems. The first is fast, automatic, emotional, instinctive. It's the system that jumps to conclusions, reacts immediately, and saves energy. The second is slow, analytical, deliberate, effortful. It takes time, patience, and discipline to use. The problem is simple. In today's high-speed world, most of us rarely engage the slow system. We are stuck in fast mode, jumping from one conclusion to another without pausing to reflect. This makes life more efficient, but it also makes us vulnerable. Politicians, advertisers, and media outlets understand this well. They know that if they package an idea with emotional intensity, fear, outrage, hope, pride, the fast brain will grab it and defend it before the slow brain even has a chance to engage. And once that emotional hook takes root, it becomes hard to let go. Think about how political slogans work. They are short, charged with emotion, easy to remember, impossible to forget. They bypass reasoning entirely. Or consider advertising. Rarely does a commercial give you raw data. Instead, it paints a story, a feeling, security, happiness, status, that persuades not your reason, but your instincts. The same is true for news. Headlines are crafted to stir emotion first, accuracy second. This is not incompetence. It is design. And once we accept a narrative, confirmation bias takes over. This is one of the most powerful traps in the human mind. Once you believe something, your brain begins to filter reality in ways that reinforce that belief. You notice evidence that supports it. You dismiss evidence that challenges it. You surround yourself with people who agree, and you interpret disagreement as hostility. Before long, you're not searching for truth anymore. You're defending a fortress of assumptions. Ask yourself honestly, how often do you seek out perspectives that contradict your own? Not to argue, but to understand. How often do you let yourself feel the discomfort of realizing you might be wrong? For most of us, the answer is rare. And that's not because we are weak, it's because the brain resists it. We are wired to prefer the comfort of being right, even when reality disagrees. But confirmation bias is only part of the trap. Another is groupthink, the tendency of groups to prioritize harmony over truth. The social psychologist Irving Janis coined the term after observing how even highly intelligent people, in groups, make catastrophic decisions when they silence their doubts for the sake of consensus. History is littered with such examples. Corporations launching disastrous products, governments pursuing reckless wars, committees ignoring warnings, all because dissent felt dangerous and agreement felt safe. In groupthink, the cost of questioning becomes greater than the cost of being wrong. And so people stay silent. They nod, they agree, they suppress their doubts. And in that silence, terrible decisions are born. It's easy to believe that only the weak-minded fall into these traps. But history tells a different story. Galileo, Darwin, Martin Luther King Jr., all faced ridicule, rejection, or hostility for questioning the collective certainty of their time. Their courage to think differently reshaped the world, but not without cost. They remind us of something uncomfortable. Thinking critically is often an act of rebellion. And rebellion rarely comes without risk. In today's culture, that risk is not just intellectual. It is social. To question the dominant narrative, whether in politics, religion, or ideology, can mean being labeled, excluded, or attacked. And that fear keeps most people quiet. It's easier to go along, to nod, to repeat what everyone else is saying. But easy choices carry hidden costs. When you silence your questions long enough, you stop asking them altogether. This silence creates a deeper crisis, a loss of inner dialogue. Once upon a time, humans valued the quiet space of thought. Time to reflect, to wrestle with questions, to let wisdom emerge. Today, that space has been outsourced. Instead of wrestling with questions ourselves, we Google them. Instead of sitting in uncertainty, we refresh the feed. Instead of forming beliefs through reflection, we borrow them from whatever tribe we identify with. But no algorithm can tell you what is true for you. No trending topic can replace the voice of your own examined thought. And so, the great tragedy of our time is not the flood of information. It is the drought of reflection. We consume, but we don't digest. We react, but we don't reflect. We skim, but we don't understand. And the result is a population overwhelmed with input, but starving for meaning. So what can we do? The first step is awareness. Awareness of how easily the mind is swayed. Awareness of the shortcuts we rely on. Awareness of the moments when we are not thinking, but reacting. This is what psychologists call metacognition, thinking about our thinking. It's the ability to pause and ask, why do I believe what I believe? What evidence am I ignoring? What emotions are driving this judgment? Practicing metacognition is not glamorous. It takes effort, but it is the seed of freedom. Because when you see the trap, you are no longer fully caught in it. Another powerful tool is dialectical thinking, the practice of holding two opposing ideas in tension without rushing to resolve them. This is not weakness. It is strength. It is the ability to remain with complexity, to explore perspectives without collapsing them into easy binaries. This is how new understanding is born. When you stop demanding that every question have a simple answer, you open yourself to deeper truths. The philosopher Jiddu Krishnamurti once said, "To understand the immeasurable, the mind must be extraordinarily quiet, still." That stillness is rare today. But it is in that stillness that wisdom grows. And let's be honest, wisdom is what society is starving for. Intelligence we have in abundance. Opinions we have in excess. But wisdom, the capacity to sit with uncertainty, to seek depth instead of noise, is disappearing. And without wisdom, intelligence becomes dangerous. It becomes fuel for ideology, justification for bias, a tool for manipulation. This is why critical thinking is not just a personal luxury. It is a public necessity. A society without thinkers becomes easy prey for propaganda, division, and tyranny. When people stop questioning, they become malleable clay in the hands of those who benefit from their ignorance. But cultivating critical thought is not about becoming cynical or contrarian. It is about becoming honest, with yourself first. It means resisting intellectual laziness. It means noticing when an idea feels too good to be true and pausing before accepting it. It means noticing when everyone around you believes something and daring to investigate instead of simply joining. It means slowing down in a world addicted to speed. And perhaps most importantly, it means cultivating humility. The kind of humility that says, I might be wrong. The kind of humility that can sit in uncertainty without panic. The kind of humility that values learning more than winning. Because in the end, critical thinking is not about proving you are right. It is about pursuing what is true. And truth is rarely found in slogans, headlines, or mobs. It is found in the quiet work of reflection, in the willingness to admit ignorance, in the courage to investigate what others avoid. When you practice this kind of thinking, you begin to see the difference between noise and signal. You begin to recognize propaganda disguised as news. You begin to notice when language is designed not to inform you, but to provoke you. You start to see manipulation for what it is. And once you see it, it loses its power. This is why reclaiming your ability to think is the most revolutionary act you can take in the modern world. Because once you see clearly, you cannot be controlled in the same way. You may still be pressured, still be attacked, still be ridiculed. But deep inside, you will know your thoughts are yours. Not borrowed. Not manufactured. Not fed to you by an algorithm. Yours. And from that foundation, something remarkable happens. You gain clarity. You gain self-respect. You gain the quiet power that comes from living in alignment with truth. And in a world drowning in noise, that clarity is rare. It shines. It inspires. It spreads. Because thinking is not just a private act. It ripples outward. Every time you pause instead of reacting, you change the tone of the conversation. Every time you ask a deeper question, you challenge others to reflect. Every time you model humility instead of arrogance, you remind people that there is another way to engage. And this is how revolutions begin, not with noise, but with depth. Not with mobs, but with minds. But we must also face the deepest truth of all. Critical thinking is disappearing not simply because we are distracted, or manipulated, or overwhelmed. Those are symptoms. The core reason is more unsettling. People are afraid. Afraid of what they might find if they think too deeply. Afraid of the truths that might unravel their identities, their tribes, their beliefs. Because to think critically is not just to question the world. It is to question yourself. And for many, that is the hardest task of all. Stay with me, because in the final part of this journey we will face that truth directly. We'll explore why identity itself has become the enemy of thought, and why reclaiming your freedom to think requires not just intellect, but courage of the soul. What you're about to hear may be the most important truth of all, the truth that determines whether you live asleep in comfort or awake in freedom. At the heart of this crisis, beneath the noise of technology, the failures of education, the manipulation of media, lies something even more profound. Critical thinking is disappearing not because people are incapable of it, but because they are afraid of what it might reveal. To think critically is to risk the very things that give us comfort, our identities, our beliefs, our tribes. For many, these are not just ideas, they are lifelines. They are the frameworks through which people understand who they are and where they belong. And so, to question an idea begins to feel like questioning yourself. It feels like tearing away a piece of your own skin. This is why identity has become sacred in the modern age. People define themselves by their political parties, their religions, their ideologies, their social groups. To challenge an idea is now seen not as a search for truth, but as a personal attack. And yet, this is the very illusion that destroys thinking. Because you are not your political party. You are not your tribe. You are not your ideology. You are something far more expansive. A human being with the capacity to evolve, to learn, to grow, to change. But the journey of change begins only when you detach your worth from your current beliefs. When you realize that you are more than the ideas you hold right now. When you accept that growth requires letting go. And here lies the ultimate truth. Critical thinking is not just an intellectual skill. It is a spiritual act. It is the act of honoring truth over comfort. Growth over certainty. Freedom over approval. It is the quiet decision to live with your eyes open, even when the light burns. Because once you begin to think critically, the illusions start to fall away. You see the systems of manipulation, the algorithms of control, the masks people wear. You notice how often your choices are nudged, how often your fears are played upon, how often your identity is used against you. At first, this can be painful. It can even be overwhelming. The world you thought you knew begins to feel less stable, less certain. But this pain is not the end. It is the beginning. For reality, no matter how uncomfortable, is the only foundation upon which true freedom can be built. The great psychologist Carl Jung once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls." And he was right. We will cling to distractions, ideologies, slogans, anything to avoid the quiet confrontation with ourselves. But this confrontation is the very essence of critical thought. Because true thinking is not just about questioning the world outside. It is about questioning the world within. Why do I believe what I believe? Where did this idea come from? What am I afraid of losing if I let it go? When you begin to ask those questions honestly, a new world opens up. A world not of borrowed truths, but of earned wisdom. And wisdom is what we are starving for. In a culture addicted to quick answers, wisdom invites deeper questions. In a system built on noise, wisdom offers silence. In an era obsessed with conformity, wisdom dares to be free. This is your invitation, not just to think, but to awaken. To stop living as a product of your environment, and to start becoming the architect of your own mind. Because no school will do this for you. No system, no social media platform, no government. The responsibility is yours, and yours alone. But when you rise to it, when you choose to think, something extraordinary happens. You begin to live with clarity. You begin to feel what it means to align with truth. Not convenient truth, not popular truth, but your own hard-earned truth. You begin to notice when manipulation is at work. You start to distinguish between information and propaganda, between education and indoctrination, between connection and performance. You begin to recognize the subtle ways you are nudged to conform, and you no longer move so easily with the current. And most importantly, you begin to lead. Not with noise, not with ego, but with depth. You become a light in a dark room, a voice of calm in a storm of outrage, a grounded thinker in a world of reaction. This is what the world needs now more than ever. Not louder voices, not sharper arguments, but deeper minds. Minds willing to hold complexity. Minds willing to say, I don't know, but I'm willing to learn. Minds that are no longer interested in winning debates, but in understanding reality. If you truly want to change the world, begin by changing the way you think. Not because it is easy. Not because it is popular. But because it is right. The rise of collective stupidity is not the root cause, it is the symptom. A symptom of fear. A symptom of exhaustion. A symptom of a society too distracted to look inward. But every time you think clearly, you push back against that tide. Every time you pause to reflect instead of react, you reclaim your power. Every time you ask a question instead of accepting an answer, you open a crack of light into the darkness. So remember this. The most revolutionary thing you can do today is not to shout louder, not to conform, not to repeat what others say. It is to think. To think carefully. To think deeply. To think courageously. Let others sleepwalk through slogans and screens. Let them trade freedom for validation. But not you. You are awake now. And once you awaken, you can never go back. If this message resonates with you, don't let it end here. Share it. Not because it is trendy, but because it is necessary. Share it with those who still dare to think, with those who still hunger for truth, with those who are ready to awaken. And if you are still listening now, know this, you are not alone. There is a quiet revolution happening. A movement not of noise, but of minds. Not of outrage, but of awareness. It begins every time one person chooses to ask the harder question. It begins every time someone resists the easy answer. It begins every time someone chooses truth over comfort. Let that person be you. Stay curious. Stay awake. And above all, keep thinking.